Hello everyone. Welcome to Women and Children First, the virtual edition. And happy birthday to Patricia and McNair, our author this evening. And happy birthday to her amazing new book, Responsible Adults. My name is Sarah Hollenbeck. I'm the co-owner of Women and Children First. We are one of the last feminist bookstores left in the United States. And we are beyond excited for tonight's reading and conversation with Patty McNair and Eric May. In celebrating tonight, we are celebrating Patty's new book, Responsible Adults. And also, I want to say thank you so much to the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame, who generously decided to co-sponsor tonight's event. And with that, we begin our virtual events as we begin our events held here in the store with a land acknowledgement. So please join me in acknowledging that the land on which Women and Children First stands is the unceded territory of the Peoria, the Potawatomi, the Miami, and the Sioux people. Chicago has the third largest urban Native American population in the country, with over 100 tribal nations represented. Our bookstore strives to recognize and honor Native literature and Native communities. So thank you. Women and Children First is currently closed for in-store browsing, but we do offer curbside pickup from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we ship anywhere in the United States. We have another event coming up later this week. On Thursday, we'll be hosting Devin Price for a very new book called Laziness Does Not Exist. It looks good with Patty's book too. And also a few housekeeping notes. Be sure to drop your questions for Patty or Eric in the Ask a Question box that's located at the bottom of your screen. Also, there's a very handy Buy the Book button also at the bottom of your screen. So if you haven't bought the book yet, please do so by clicking that button. And please, you are already using the chat bar to tell us you're in the room and happy to be here. So thank you for making this feel like a real lively event. On to tonight's event, Patricia Ann McNair teaches English and creative writing at the Creative Writing Department of Columbia College, Chicago. She is the author of the award-winning collection, The Temple of Air, and the essay collection, And These Are the Good Times. Eric Charles Bay is the author of the novel Bedrock Faith, a former reporter for the Washington Post. He's also an associate professor in the fiction writing program at Columbia. I know that many of you who are in this virtual room are regulars at Women and Children First book launch parties. And so I want you all to imagine that you're piling into those uncomfortable folding chairs and trying to balance a half glass of wine in one hand and a new copy of Responsible Adults in the other. We hope to return to those days by the end of 2021. But in the meantime, we are so grateful that all of you are gathered with us here virtually to celebrate Patty and this phenomenal new book. I love the heart-forward, tender prose of Patricia Ann McNair. She is an expert at giving us full-throated characters who are an endearing balance of steely and vulnerable. The kids in these stories are trying to take hold of the reins of the responsibility that their parents have dropped over and over again. These stories are fissured with a million little disappointments and triumphs, and it is all so stunning. So I can't wait to listen to this conversation between Eric and Patty. So please help me in welcoming Eric May and Patricia Ann McNair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really want to thank you all. I love all these notes that you've thrown in the chat here, the happy birthday notes. Thank you for those, the happy book day notes, all of the wonderful notes to Eric as well. Eric and I are really happy to see you. I've used air quotes more in the last 8 months than I ever have before in my life, I think, because nothing is real. It's all in air quotes. But anyway, thank you all so much for being here. And I really want to especially thank Sarah Hallenbeck and Women and Children First. It's the dream bookstore, and it's very, very close to where I live, and I pass it daily almost on my walks, and I can't wait to be able to walk back into it again in just a short while. I also really want to thank my good friend Eric Charles May for agreeing to be part of this virtual launch tonight. He's my longtime colleague and dear friend and a writer whose work I admire. And if you haven't yet read Bedrock Faith, his novel, I suggest that you also, when you put your order in to buy my book tonight, because I hope you do, but when you do that, I hope that you also will order a copy of Bedrock Faith by Eric. So I'm just thrilled to be here tonight with you, celebrating the Chicago launch of Responsible Adults. This is my second short story collection. It was just released from Cornerstone Press out of the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. I'm also thrilled to celebrate my birthday with you. And I want to invite you to raise a glass, even though I can't see if you do or not, but raise a glass with me if you would, to celebrate this day. This is really, really good champagne given to me by a close friend, and I'm not going to tell you who that is because you would be really jealous if you knew she was buying me champagne and not you. But here's the champagne. I do want to toast in the year 2021, and hopefully it's a year that is much better than the newly departed 2020. I want to drink to your health. I want to drink to our health. I especially want to drink to Joe Biden's health and to Kamala Harris's health, to Eric's health, to Sarah's health, and to the health of our country and to this crazy, crazy world. So cheers. Tasty. So we thought we would start, cheers, thank you for that. We thought we would start, Eric and I, with a story from the collection. Coincidentally, it's from the collection. It's called Good News or Money. And Eric has agreed to help me with this story. We've taken this on the road once before, so hopefully we'll be able to present it to you first. So here it is, Good News or Money.
Hello, is this someone with good news or money? No? Goodbye. Hello, is this someone with good news or money? No? Goodbye.
Yeah, right, 1,000 clowns. Jason Robards, you're right. Okay, yeah. Hey, it's me, surprise. Long time, I know. So here's the thing. It's about Mom. Are you there? Are you listening? Can you hear me? It's about Mom. She asked me to call. I didn't want to, but she asked me to.
Hello, is this someone with good news or money? No? Goodbye.
Goddamn machine. You wait a minute to try to collect your thoughts. It's about Mom, right? I got something to say. Goddamn machine. Who uses a machine anymore anyway? What is this, the 1980s? It's about Mom. Oh, wait, you probably think I'm calling about something bad. No, geez. Wow, that's not, I mean, it's not bad. Nothing bad. No, hey, it's good. Okay, take two, or whatever.
Hello, is this someone with good news or money? No? Goodbye.
Hi, Dad? It's me. You know, your daughter? The one you haven't seen in what, 6, 7 years? Not since you moved up north to the tundra or whatever? Well, the only one, I guess, your only daughter, maybe. As far as I know, probably. Your only daughter, probably. Does that sound harsh? Sorry, it's just, I've been thinking about things, you know? Things. Just things. All kinds of things.
Hello. Is this someone with good news or money? No? Goodbye.
God damn it. Are you sure you aren't there? Pick up the goddamn phone, old man. You always loved that movie, 1,000 Clowns. I remember. You made me watch it with you, what, 100 times? Jason fucking Robards? That little kid who looked like a miniature man? Anyway, Mom wanted me to call you. She's got some news. So, yeah, good news, I guess. Good news. But no money. Ha, that's a laugh, me telling you no money. When was the last time you sent us any money, Dad? Daddy-o. Remember when I used to call you that? I was little, really little. Daddy's little girl, you used to call me. I'm 17 now. But you know that. You should. You do, don't you? I'm 17. Ah, shit. Hang on, I gotta go blow my nose.
Hello. Is this someone with good news or money? No? Goodbye.
I keep expecting you're gonna pick up the phone one of these times. Maybe you do. Maybe you do pick up the phone. Funny, but when I remember your voice, it sounds like Jason Robards in that movie. Sort of smoked rough. Is that you, Dad? Are you on the line? So here's the thing, Dad, Daddy-o. I've been thinking about that one time for some reason. Remember? That time you came home without your shoes and said you'd given them to some guy on the street. Some guy who needed them more than you. Some homeless guy who lived on the street, you said. What street was that exactly, Dad? Daddy-o. I always wanted to know, what street was that exactly? I'm a little off topic here. Mom asked me to call. That's why I'm calling. She asked me to tell you the news. But that time you came home without your shoes, Dad, I can't stop thinking about it. There you were in socks on the icy floor of the foyer, and you said you gave this guy your shoes because it was cold and he was barefoot. It was early morning, spring. I remember the sky was sort of purple. It was so early, purple like a bruise, like grape jelly. You remember. You must. We were in that yellow house in New Hope, the one with the tile floors and the toilet that always overflowed, the one with the basement that flooded all the time and smelled like wet dog, the one where Mom was pregnant for a little while, and then she wasn't. You remember. And we didn't know where you'd been, me and Mom, and then there you were, wiggling your keys in the door like you didn't know which one worked. And then you were inside, and we were watching TV, me and Mom, the morning news, just in case you were on it, in case you were news. An accident or something, hurt maybe, but you didn't look hurt, just shoeless. And Mom was eating dry toast to try to keep from puking. The morning sickness was bad, and I was eating Lucky Charms. The yellow house, you remember.
Hello. Is this someone with good news or money? No? Goodbye.
God damn it. That was my fault that time. I hit the wrong button. So Mom's news, yeah. But wait, the yellow house first. You went to bed without telling us where you were all night, but we could tell you'd been drinking. Not like we didn't know that already, but we could tell. And Mom seemed okay that you had given your shoes away, happy even, because it was something good you've been up to. She was like that for a long time, you remember, always wanting things to be good, to be right. Even that time me and her, you were gone by then, got evicted, and they threw all of our stuff out on the lawn. She was out there making neat piles in front of the yellow house, loading what she could into the taxi, but making sure the rest was all orderly, right. It was better that way, she told me. Maybe, whatever. But then a little later, I'm back to the morning you came home without your shoes. Sorry, jumping around a bit here. Anyway, later that day without your shoes, when the sun was high and hot, and the kids were playing out in the backyards and someone was mowing the lawn somewhere, I always loved that smell of cut grass, so I didn't even mind when you made me do the mowing. This lady sneaks up our walk and takes something out from a shopping bag, and she's looking nervous and something else, drunk maybe. We're watching her out the picture window, me and Mom. We could see her from where we were on the couch. Do you remember that couch? You bought it on time. I came home one day from school and it wasn't there anymore, just a place on the rug that looked cleaner than the rest of the floor. So this woman is on the front step and Mom pulls open the door and the lady is there stuffing something, notebook paper or something, into your shoes, pushing the toes right up against the screen door. Neat, like she's setting them out for you or something. And Mom says, "Hey." That's all she says, "Hey." The lady's eyes are sore looking and blue, and she smiles, says, "Excuse me," says, "his shoes." And I'm over Mom's shoulder, and the woman sees me and smiles again, but the smile breaks like it was plastic. Geez, I don't even know what that means, but I thought that then. I remember it now. Her smile broke like something plastic, and she turns and runs away.
Hello, is this someone with good news or money? No? Goodbye.
Okay, this isn't why I called this trip down memory lane or whatever. I called because Mom asked me to. She wanted you to know. She's getting married. She's happy. She wanted you to know. But now I got something to say. I only now thought of it, and it's about your favorite movie, 1,000 Clowns. Jason Robards is a bad father. He's an asshole. In the movie, I mean. I never liked that movie. It made my stomach hurt. Because I can't help remembering the one time you sat there in the living room on a kitchen chair where the couch used to be with a beer beside you on the floor. And the damn tape of that movie is on and you're staring at it like it's something important, maybe. Like there's something you have to learn from it. "Dad," I said, "Daddy-o." Remember? And you didn't even look at me. "Mom's sick, Dad." And she was. She's been bleeding all morning, only I didn't know that right then. I was too little to know much, but I knew enough. I knew she was curled up in a ball on the bed, and there was a towel underneath her, and another one soaking pink in the bathtub. And she was sweating and crying. "She's sick, Dad." And you turned to me finally, and your eyes were big black holes. You blinked, and your face was wet. And you nodded. You got up then and went into the kitchen and I could hear you in there on the phone. And then you came back with a fresh beer and sat on the kitchen chair and rewound the damn movie to where it was before you got up. And in a few minutes, I could hear a siren. So there's that. Anyway, Mom told me to call you. She told me to tell you she forgives you now. But I told her I wouldn't tell you that. Because really, who can forgive a father for loving a movie more than his own wife, his own daughter? Because I think that sums it up pretty goddamn accurately. And besides that, who can forgive a father for coming home without his shoes? Not me. No, sir, not me. Okay, then. That's all I got. No good news, not really. And no money. Just this. That's all. Okay. Okay. Woo!
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you
Oh,
for
man.
being
Well,
charity.
thank you for this wonderful collection. So enjoyed it. So enjoyed it. And talking about that that piece, good news or money. It's like, most stories are either first person or the third person or the second person, but this one is kind of non-trilingual in that it's not any of those. It's not really a first person narrator speaking to the reader. It's not really an overall storyteller kind of telling it to the audience. It's not second person. There's a you, but the you is in the conversation, not from author to audience. And I mean, you can almost work as you can see it as a performance piece. One actor on a stage with a phone, and Jason Robards' voice continuing to come in, and just talking about this sort of thing. A lot of the stories in the collection are first person, but there are also some that are third. And is there anything? I thought it would be interesting to ask: is there anything you can give us about how you arrive at figuring out, is this going to be first person or is this going to be third person? I mean, is it something you know right away? Is it sometimes you got to try it one way, this way, one way, another way? Or, if you could just talk a little bit about your figuring it out process.
Right. Yeah, good question. And people are saying here, what did you call trilingual, non-trilingual? That's a great way of speaking about that piece. Yeah, I think that I often rely on first person, probably more than I should. There's something about that, the voice of a character that I often hear that kind of brings me to the page. However, and generally when I start a story, though, I hear some of the first lines, and sometimes they're in third person and sometimes they're in first person. It doesn't always stay the way that it comes out originally. You know this, Eric, that we have this activity that we do at Columbia, a steeplechase, and we mess around with point of view. We tell a story from first person, we tell a story from third person, we pull way back, we give a more overall storyteller third person, moving back and forth in that vantage point and in that perspective. And sometimes I do a version of that when I'm working on something. I know that when I've got a first person character, for instance, who is really withholding, that it's important then for me to pull back some in the story in order to allow to know more. One of the stories that's in the book, I don't know if this is one that you're thinking about too, but it's third person, but it's a very, very close third person at the corner of Cole and Porter. Yes. And that one I kept getting closer and closer and closer into her point of view, even as it was third person, that I needed to pull back and then see the story from somebody else's point of view too, in order to not get so claustrophobic. And often I think that's where the choices will come up. Pull back and see what else you can see, and maybe that will affect the choice if it's first or third or some other iteration of those.
And of course, the title of the collection is in some ways a play on things, because a number of the adults in this collection are not being responsible. Some are trying to be and not quite making it. I think of the mother in My Mother's Daughter is one who she's trying, and some have just thrown up their hands and said, okay, enough, and some have just walked away. It's kind of a couple of stories where it seems like the parents have or one of the parents have just, I'm going to walk away. And so but it's a lot of it is adults in their relationship. I mean, when we talk about the responsibility, often it's a very specific kind of responsibility of adults to children. It's not the responsibility of, I shouldn't embezzle money from my job, or it's not, should I march in this demonstration or something, which are of course important responsibilities. But here it's really getting into this kind of very intimate responsibilities between the responsibility dynamic, if you will, between adults and children. And children at various stages. And I think one of the things that's interesting is we're getting this adult-child relationship thing from various ages of children and adults. We're seeing young kids and their parents. We're seeing adults dealing with grown parents. And because you say these stories are written over, I read in one interview, some of these have been written in the early 2000s and then others in the last 5 years. I mean, so was this a happy kind of accident? Because sometimes it works that way. Or as you continue to write, were you beginning to see a sense of this is kind of like, I think one interview you talk about a theme that you're circling on in some way.
Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of my stories, well, probably a whole lot of my stories have to do with children and parents, young children and parents. And some of you may know this, but part of that I think comes from my own father having died when I was 15 years old, and my mother being a single mother. However, I never really thought of her as that because I was the youngest and the others were already out of the house. But this idea of being abandoned, even though, my father's death was not any sort of abandonment that he was culpable for, that anybody was, it's still this feeling that I have, right, about sort of being left behind. And so a lot of the stories that I was writing had some version of that. That was almost like my default story, some version where kids were being left behind by parents or a parent, or a mother and daughter were being left behind by a parent. But then I think too, as I've become older and I've started to write older characters as well, I am really interested in that dynamic of shifting responsibility in adults and children, and adult children and their parents and children, and who's responsible for whom at this point. And so these stories kept sort of coming up to that, like, if I take care of you, or if I don't take care of you, what's the effect of that, if I'm responsible or if I'm irresponsible? But I had also been thinking, even though you mentioned that a lot of these are more about relationships or parents and children, they're all about relationships, and somebody responsible for something in the relationship, whether it's just a cop who meets somebody running on the street. There's some sort of responsibility between characters. But I was thinking too, especially now in this time where we have had the most irresponsible adults in charge of just about everything beyond our own lives, right? And I know, and that had started earlier. I remember back after 2000, the attacks in 2001, and George Bush talking about he was going to take responsibility for these things or whatever, but there was no consequence to the responsibility. And so I thought it was really interesting how people think they're responsible or know they should be responsible, but what happens when they really aren't in some way? If some way what they do is actually an irresponsible act, or they're trying to be responsible and they're actually making things worse. So those were some of the things that I was thinking about on the grander political scheme. And a couple of these stories are a little political, but most of them are more really about one person being responsible to another and to their relationship.
And I oftentimes like to say that the truth is facts in context. And one of the things that we're getting with your collection is we're not just getting the what happened, we're getting the why it happened, that we're getting the context of why this has occurred. And even sometimes with the characters who are less than stellar, some of them, it's not like we approve or we're even saying what they've done is okay, but we understand. There's a kind of, and if you can talk a little bit about how you get to that as a writer, where you can, this which is a very delicate act of where you're not sugarcoating it, but at the same time you do want the reader to understand this is why this human has done this or is doing this.
Right. I have always been really interested in the complications and the complexities of our own personalities. We all fuck up all the time, and it doesn't mean we're bad people, right? Sometimes it does mean we're bad people, but I don't think that any of my characters are particularly bad. Some might be a little bad, but I wanted them to have the space. I find that bad behavior is much more interesting to read than good behavior, for one thing. So I wanted them to have the space to behave badly. Maybe that's my next collection, Bad Behavior. So I think that might be a Gateskill collection. But I wanted them to have the space to behave badly, but I also wanted them to seem human. I remember, Eric, you have done a craft talk on writing about race. And one of the things that you said that I really admire and I really believe is at the core of whatever good character we're trying to write is to try to find the humanity in the character. If you're writing about somebody who's of a different race, the most important thing isn't that they're from a different race. The most important thing is that they're human and that then they have humanity. And so I think with the idea of responsible adults and people who behave badly, that if we look at them as full on human, that there's probably more to it than just the bad act. I thought it's been really interesting to me. A lot of my blurbs and reviews and things have said compassionate stories, which, either that's like a buzzword for blurbs right now, or else I think I am doing something where I'm allowing people the space to behave. I don't let them off the hook, but I allow them the space to behave badly and to try to figure out, now, why did they do that? They fucked up, but maybe there's more to it than just the bad behavior.
Yeah, I think about the narrator and What Girls Want, which is it's painful. I mean, he is, and the character's even aware that they're goofing up, and yet can't somehow find a way to. It's like I know I'm stepping into this minefield of my own making, and yet I can't help but step into the minefield, and which is such an understanding, and when you are writing these kinds of characters, I mean, how are you seeing it imaginatively? Is there anything about how, is there an angle or vantage point, and does that shift at any point while you're doing it? I mean, is there something you're seeing it? Is there something about where you're seeing it imaginatively that allows you to get to that?
Interesting. That's a really interesting question. Let me think about that a little bit. I don't know that I can swear by this, but I do think that even in my third person stories that I often see the moments of story, the happenings, the situations, at least partially from their point of view. So through their vantage point. And I think I need to do that in order, maybe that's how I start to understand a little bit more about their choices or the choices that they make. At some point then, yeah, I will sort of step back and try to actually see them. And that would be more from my storytelling point of view or my writer's point of view to see them. But my stories often come to me through this connection between seeing a character and seeing a place, seeing a character in a moment, perhaps through their eyes, but then also seeing the place. And it's the combination of character and place together. What are they doing in this place? And who else is there? I think that's part of what allows me to imaginatively get into those moments of story. I don't think in terms of plot at all, and I think in terms of causality, another crafts lecture that I've heard you give, Eric, I do think if this has been, so what does that cause to happen? But I usually don't do that until after I've seen a bunch of scenes, seen things through my character's eyes, pulled back to get kind of an overall storyteller's point of view. And then as these scenes start to mount up, then I start to think, well, what does this cause to happen? And what does this cause to happen? And that kind of spinning from there. But it's really a matter of both seeing it from some distance with seeing it from the vantage point of characters.
Okay. And when we think about our influences in terms of authors that we've read, and of course different authors can influence us for different reasons. Sometimes it's actually, you can have a profound craft effect, but other times it can be something like, when I was in high school, just reading Invisible Man, just knowing that a Black person could write a novel was a really important thing for 15-year-old Eric to figure out. And so for you, are there any writers that, and of course we're all affected by all the good writing that we read, but are there any writers in particular who you've read that you look back on it now, because you've been at this a while now, and can say, yeah, this the effect this writer had on me was this, or the effect it had on me was that. It may have been just a boost in confidence in some way, or some other kind of influence.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when I first started to write with any seriousness of purpose was when I was an undergrad at Columbia College Chicago, and in a story workshop class. And along about that time, I stumbled on Raymond Carver, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. And also we were reading Black Boy by Richard Wright. And so each of those books, I mean, incredibly different books, right? They're about as different as they can be. But each of those books, what they gave me permission was to not try to write happy stories. I know this is to the chagrin of some of my friends who want to read my books, and they're like my hair, they're short and dark. But it was Raymond Carver, and letting him show how people struggle through the ache and through their bad decisions, and then reading Black Boy and seeing this character move through all this really horrific poverty, other things too, that bad behavior from his own parents, really bad behavior from others upon him, that it allowed me to understand that I could write stories that weren't all, goody-goody. And I was always aware of that. I grew up in the suburbs, and you think about something like Wonder Years, right? And that's one sort of suburban upbringing. But I grew up in the suburbs, in the Vietnam, there's the draft, and and as I said, my dad died. There was a lot of pain in the suburbs that people kind of hid. And so to write the stories that were interesting to me when I was a kid, I have that permission now by reading Carver and by reading Black Boy. More recently, I would say, particularly my short stories, I think are very much affected by Bonnie Jo Campbell and the work that she does, and the way that she allows her women characters to be sexual for good and for bad. There's a lot of sex in my books. So if that's what you're interested in, buy a book. So there is Bonnie Jo Campbell. And then in terms of stylistic things that I really would love to be able to do, things like Virginia Woolf and Hubert Selby. And into my mind, those aren't too different, because they just sort of overlap in terms of thoughts, and they overlap in terms of one idea spins into another and piles onto another, and big chunky paragraphs and things like that, which is very much what I like to do as well, digging in to a point of view and then spiraling out. So those are just a few of the names. And there, and there are many others, like, every time you read a new book. Right now I'm reading Like Love by Michelle Morano. Makes me ache to write essays. I haven't written an essay in a while, and they're so amazing. You read those books that by somebody else, and you're like, I have to try this. So.
Well, also interesting you mentioned Bonnie Jo Campbell, because it seems that when you look at the socioeconomic range or the socioeconomic area of these stories, A New Hope, this town where a lot of the stories are placed, which is also where the stories from your first collection were placed, and it's something up the amount that this is this. So the folks in these stories aren't real rich. And some of them are, but it's kind of an economic range. And is that also, part of your Midwesternness? And though you grew up in the suburbs, it wasn't Lake Forest. And right. So something about how just this whole thing of class and how that winds up working in your, working in your fiction.
We were sort of clawing our way into the middle class by the time I was born. My parents were not particularly wealthy when they had their first 3 boys. I don't think they had, they didn't have a bad life, but my mom worked during the day, and my dad worked during the night, and they would meet to swap the kids, she was getting off the bus and he was getting on the bus, kind of thing. These are the stories that I heard when I was a kid. By the time I came along, we were already pretty firmly into the suburbs, but we were very much in sort of richer suburbs around us. We were not rich, and especially after my dad died, my mother was a single woman trying to pay the mortgage. But we would have these homeowner association Christmas parties, for instance, and the other parents, and you would buy one present for your kids during that time. And so other parents would buy their kids like a new color TV, a new this or a new that, and we'd get Tinker toys. And so I was always aware of that sort of distinction between people who have money and who don't. But my parents were also very much, they were union people, they were rabble-rousers, again, pre-me. And so they had very much this idea of you should not necessarily aspire to riches, you should aspire to other things. And so we didn't have a lot. We had certainly enough, but I was really interested in those who were making it without having a lot. And so, for instance, my dad worked downtown, and I would go with him to the office to file, and get like a little bit of an allowance every week. And we would take the train and we would drive through the train would ride through Rogers Park. It was the Howard line back then, before it was the Red Line and all of that. And we would see the back ends of all those apartments, and I would look in the windows of those apartments, and that was so romantic to me, this idea of, these small, they weren't cold water flats by this time, but these small apartments that were a little dingy, and there'd be junk on the porch, and the windows might be cracked or something. It's just so romantic to me. So there is something that I'm really intrigued with, that idea of people who don't have a lot, and then how do they make their lives out of what they do have.
So oftentimes, writing is spoken about as, it's labor, it's the famous line, writing is easy, just sit down and open up a vein or something like that, but, it's not all work. It's not all, drudgery. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the pleasure. I mean, so many of the other artistic forms, pleasure is just something that's understood to be part of it. If you're a musician, obviously you enjoy playing. If you're painting, or if you're acting or something, but could you talk some about what is pleasurable about writing for you? Where does the pleasure come in?
That's such a good question. During this horrible time that we're all engaged in right now, I have not been writing as much. Luckily, I've been able to work on editing projects with this book, and so revising things and making things. But I am a journal keeper like no other journal keeper. If I spend every day on my journal as much as I can. I love good journals. One of the people who's here bought me this beautiful journal from a place called Shinola. Margaret, thank you, Gilmany. This beautiful, beautiful journal. So I love to have good journals. I love to have good pens. Philip just got me a bunch of these gel pens in various colors for Christmas. So so the easy smooth of that. So just the physicality of sitting down with my journal and a cup of coffee in the sunshine or in the gray, that is incredibly pleasurable to me, even if what I end up doing is just writing down like ideas for my next syllabus or figuring out my budget, or if I find my way into an essay. So just the physicality of it is very pleasurable to me. I also know, Eric, that you're an amazing editor and reviser, and that is not one of the things that I like to do much, is revising. I like to write for continued discovery. And so what happens then, I've been working on a novel forever, and I keep kind of taking it in new directions and keep discovering more. And that's some of the most delightful pleasure of the writing process to me, is discovering something new, figuring something out. You thought you knew something about this story, and you're writing something and you're like, holy shit, what is that? Where did that come from? Oh, that's exciting. Let me follow that. So it's really both the physicality of it, but also the discovery of it that I find the most pleasurable. And then and the filling the well, the reading beforehand, reading other people's work is part of the job.
Yeah. Well, can you talk some now about just what was the process for figuring out, because when you're going to have a collection of stories, you got to figure out what the order is going to be, and how do you arrive at that? Do you try to figure it out in your head first, or do you put all the stories on a table and move them around, or I don't know. What's the process of figuring out how and where you're going to put what?
I am a big believer in keeping a binder, printing things up and keeping a binder. And with short stories, that's pretty easy, so you can move things around. I had a student who was one of my grad students. I make my grad students who are working on their thesis get a binder too to print things out, because I think one of the worst things that's happened to writing is the cut and paste feature of computers and word processing, because we don't write to discover in the same way. But one of my grad students, she would have her contents page, and all of the titles were on sticky notes, so she could just move them around, and she didn't have to like pop open the binder and pull out the pages and move the pages. I pop open the binder and pull out the pages and move the pages. And I didn't know this one. This one took me a while to figure out the way that it was going to be put together. Initially, I just wanted to do short, long, short, long, short, long. But then I finally figured out that this idea of the aging of the responsibility was important, or the shifting of the aging and the responsibility. So most of my characters in the beginning are very young, and then they get a little older, and then toward the end, they're essentially adults. There might be characters who are young too, but it's the adults who are responsible for one another. And that just seemed natural once I figured it out. Once I figured it out, I thought, what was I doing? You know, how come I didn't see that before? And part of it was because I didn't really know I had a collection. And it wasn't until I found out about this publisher, Cornerstone, and read a really wonderful collection that they had done called Nothing to Lose by Kim Sur some time ago. And when I found the stuff that they were doing, I was really interested in their work. And then I thought, well, I have all these stories. So as you know, some of them are like 18, 19 years old, but I have all these stories. What happens if I start to put them all in the same place? What might make sense if I decide to do that and move them around and see how they might feed off of each other? So it's a long process, but it was fun. And when I figured it out at the end, it was really fun, because I think I finally cracked it. But I did that with the help of the editors from Cornerstone.
Okay. Well, we have some questions, and I think it would be cool if we maybe see, like, let's click on here, and what we have here is, what have you done during the pandemic to keep yourself motivated as a writer? Or let me reword that. What have you done during the pandemic to keep yourself motivated to write? That's the question.
Drink?
Mm-hmm.
No, kidding. Not really about drinking. That wouldn't help at all. Again, it isn't. This is a well time, you know, a filling the well time for me. I'm not so motivated in terms of putting things on the page. I'm so excited that tomorrow I'm going to have a residency, starting tomorrow, a residency at Ragdale for 11 days. Ragdale has done this incredibly smart thing in the way that they're just bringing 2 people onto campus at a time. And so we don't have to be anywhere near each other. We don't have to cross each other's paths. And so that will really allow me the opportunity to try to reacquaint myself with the deep writing process that I haven't been able to feel during the pandemic, because like you, Eric, I've been teaching remotely now since March. It's 4 times the work, you know, and then over the summer I was teaching a few remote workshops and things, and then editing this book. So it was really, really hard for me to do that. But just that idea of keeping the journal practice sacred, and so that it feels like brushing one's teeth right, that has helped me at least to put pen to page pretty much every day during the pandemic, even though I haven't been able to dig deeply into the work that matters to me, besides this book, you know, doing the finals on this book.
Another question we have here is, which story particularly surprised or challenged you in its genesis or construction?
I think there might be there. Can I say 2? I'm going to say 2. So one is Maria Concepcion. And that story, this was a Ragdale story. Again, I had been working on this long novel that I keep trying to finish at Ragdale, and I discovered something at that Ragdale residency. I discovered a lot that was wrong with that novel, and I felt totally disheartened, which had never happened before in a residency. You know, you always at a residency and you feel like anything's possible creatively and artistically. But I just realized that I had really messed this book up by some of the choices that I made, and I had no idea how to get it back. And I'd been working on it for years by that time. So I just said, okay, let me just try this other thing. I'll be interested to and I had there's a pastor in the novel that I've been working on. I thought, what if I had a woman pastor, and what if I, what if there was it's a sort of it's a bit of a magical story. It's either a magical story or it's not a magical story, depending on the way you want to read it. And then I sat down and I just wrote, and pretty much finished a first draft in just the last 4 days at Ragdale. And it took me a little while then to do more with it. And then I was very lucky to have some help from Chris Rice for hypertext when they decided they would take it. She helped me make things a little stronger. So that one surprised me because I had a day or two of thinking, I am not a writer. I don't know what, I'm going to say it. I shot my wad. I can't write another thing. I just can't do it. I've done what I have to do. And so it was really joyful for me to be able to move into that story. And then at the corner of Cole and Porter, which is the anchor story, the final story. And Eric, we used to have a house in Mount Carroll, and our house was on the corner of Cole and Porter. So it was one of those things. And so, but the deep point of view of a woman who is losing her memory was really fun to explore. And that was another one that came pretty quickly, but again, it came, or at least the first draft came pretty quickly. It came when I was with my writing gal pals, the Wild Herons. We were on one of our retreats, and some of you were out there, Anne Marie and Gail and Nancy and Julia and the rest of you. We were all sitting down to write, and again, I couldn't figure out the novel. These stories have happened sort of as a way, an antidote to not being able to figure out this novel. And so when I started that, and I really allowed myself to follow the flights of her weird memory and the mnemonic devices that she was trying to do to remember things, it was just joyful. It was so much fun to do that, even though, of course, I make her not the best mother in the world, of course, because I can't, right? But it was a really fun discovery for me. And then there were a few stages on that book too that I discovered on that story where I would discover a little bit more and a little bit more, and in ways that I just hadn't expected.
Well, I have another question for you, and because this isn't, of course, it's a collection of short stories. However, there is at least one character who seems to show up more than once. And I'm talking about Dorothy. And she, of course, is in the anchor story at the end at the corner of Cole and Porter. But there's a Dorothy who is also shows up, earlier in the very first Flash piece. And then there's another Dorothy who winds up getting a hitchhike ride, and much to her surprise, winds up becoming suddenly the confessor, or hearing the confession of this guy. And so and of course it works. Even if they're all separate, if they're different Dorothys, it works. But it also works if they're the same Dorothy. And you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. Maybe you just want to let it be a question in the reader's mind. But is it the same Dorothy, or is it different Dorothys? Because, like I said, it works either way. I mean, for me, it worked either way.
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, and I thank you for that. I'm glad that worked either way for you. To me, it is the same Dorothy, even though initially a couple of those stories, well, actually a few of those stories were not Dorothy. Dorothy didn't fully show up until Cole and Porter, but I like this idea of having kind of recurring characters who they kind of work as anchors to the story, or as sort of like mileposts to the story, so you see a recurring character and a recurring character. So I'd written the very first story, What Was to Come, and that wasn't Dorothy originally, but I thought, well, what if that is Dorothy? Because then I end with her and her mother. So what if I started the book with Dorothy and her mother, and then I end with Dorothy and her mother? The one on the hitchhiking that hadn't been Dorothy originally. It had been another man in the car. And then again, I thought, well, this might be a more interesting story if it were a woman in the car instead of a man, the hitchhiker were a woman instead of a man. Then once I did that, and then I discovered in writing Colin Porter that Dorothy had been kind of running around as she was a young kid, you know, and a teenager. And I thought, well, she could have done this. And I also discovered that she was a traveler in writing the Colin Porter thing. And I thought, well, what if she were the person in this story that takes place in the UK? So I gave those stories to her. She wasn't born in them.
And it becomes this really interesting, because there's certain points where you take the story not only out of New Hope, but out of the United States completely. One of them through Dorothy's memory of this Parisian street guy. And let me, there's another question. Well, this is, you kind of landed on this a little bit about residences. This question concerns residences. Can you talk more about how you use your time at residencies? What's your advice for making the most of time away to write?
I would say that the most is to feel as though, well, the first time that I ever did a residency was the first time that I ever really started to call myself a writer. Because if you have been accepted for a residency, it's almost like a job. And I don't mean that people have brought you there because they expect you to write, or they want you to write, or they want you to create. And so for me, I'm kind of a dutiful person. You know, if you give me instructions, I often will find them. Mm-hmm. So the first time that I went to a residency, I remember part of my process is often playing a few games of free cell before I actually like put fingers to the keyboard. And I remember I was playing cards and there were windows in my room. This was at the Vermont Studio Center. There were windows in my room and I was afraid somebody was going to see that I was playing cards instead of writing. So there was this guilt factor that helped me write a lot. That also happened to be the place where I met my husband years ago. So, you know, that's a good way to use your time at a residency, is to meet the man that you will fall in love with and marry. But for me, I part of my dutifulness is also routine. I love routine. So it would be, I would get up in the morning, I would have a cup of coffee with my journal, I would go for a long walk, I would sit down at the computer when I came back, I might take a nap, then I would read, and then I would read my own pages pretty close to right before I went to sleep so that I would kind of be thinking about them. And I would wake up the next morning and I would start in my journal. And in my journal in those days, I would very often be problem solving for those pieces. There's that thing that sometimes happens, and I know some of you who've been at residencies, this has happened to you, where you sit down and you write like maybe 8 hours the first day or 9, and you're like, this is awesome, I'm going to do this every day. Well, no one can really keep that up. But this idea, if you put all of your attention on the writing, try not to answer your, you know, if you need to call your husband at the end of the day or something like that, or your family at the end of the day, but try not to interrupt it with all the other crap that we interrupt our lives with, you know, when we're at home. Like some people would say, well, I've got all this time before school starts again. I could take these 11 days and just write at home, but no, I can't. You know, what do I do at home? I do the laundry, I do the dishes, I do, you know, I worry about, you know, should I check the mail, all this sort of stuff. And those sorts of things you just don't even have to think about. And at Ragdale, they feed you, they make you dinner. And a lot of these places, they'll feed you, they'll give you dinner. It'll be easy for you to get. So you can totally dig in to that place. And sometimes, and I've had a few of these and they've been so rich for me. But again, this one that I had the last time that I was there for a long time, where I really had a failure of a crisis of confidence. But it was good to be there too, because if I'd had that at home, it would be easy for me to say, well, yeah, but I got to teach, and I got these travel articles I got to write, and I got these other things that I've been hired to do. But no, since I was still there, I had to kind of live with that idea that I am here to create. And even if I don't think I'm any good at it, I got to create.
Another question we have here, it says, you talked a bit about subject matter permission. What enabled you to discover voice and subject matter permission so much at the heart of these stories? And how do you keep rediscovering it in the present?
Okay, let me think about that. I have to say, as I get, as I've gotten a little older, I might, and as the world has changed a little bit, I am a little more self-censorious than I used to be. I don't give myself as much permission, I don't think, as I would like. But for me, it started, again, Columbia College story workshop classes, and classes with, Andy Allegretti and John Schultz and Betty Schultz, and John Schultz and Betty Shiflett and Sean Shiflett, and these people who, they would say, just write it, just tell it, don't withhold it. See what happens when you write it. And that was essential, I think, that subject matter permission early on in my formative years. When I get a little bit in my way now, it's not so much that I'm censoring myself as I'm trying to think about all the consequences of the things that I choose to write and what I want to say. But I do think that we are almost overly cautious right now, and maybe particularly, if you've read my work, you know that a lot of it has to do with sexuality, teenage sexuality, young people's sexuality, those sorts of things, and I think we could be afraid to write that stuff right now, and I don't think we should be afraid to write that stuff right now. I think probably once we're out of whatever this thing is that we're in, that students and young people are going to start to be a little bit more carefree about their sexuality. I hope, sorry parents, I don't mean to alarm you, but I think that to sort of look at those things that matter to us, and then try to figure out how do we tell them. And sometimes just telling them before we even think about why we shouldn't tell them, at least tell it to the page. It's better to get it down and then forget about it, than to worry about, should I say this? Let me just write this here and no one ever has to see it, and see what happens.
Here's one. Do your characters take you by surprise, or have they been in your thinking for a long time? You spoke of changing the gender of a passenger in a car. How often does that happen?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. They take me by surprise. They have to take me by surprise. If they're not taking me by surprise, then I'm doing it wrong. So I do think about them for a long time. I carry things around for a long time in my head. But I often will, I don't do that very often until I've actually started a story. So they're already starting to be present for me on the page. And then like on walks, I'll be thinking about them and, talking about them with friends and that kind of thing. But I'm really interested in what they want to do. I'm really interested in what they expose for me. And so, yes, there are some, I think it's important that they surprise me. And if they don't take me by surprise, like I said, they're going to be pretty flat. The idea of changing gender of a character, that doesn't happen very often. And I think it was because these were very, very short stories that there were flash stories that it could happen. If they had been considerably longer stories and I knew more about those characters by that time, I wouldn't have been able to be so carefree with, giving them a different gender or giving them a different name or a different age. The more I write, the more I know about them. And then the more I think about them, and then the more I write, the more I know, and the more they surprise me.
I think we have time for one more question. And this one is basically it's asking, this person is wondering, making a comparison between your work and Bonnie Jo Campbell's, wondering if you think there is a Midwestern voice sensibility. I
do, and I think that might be Kim Sir who wrote that, and she, she's a Wisconsin writer, and she would definitely, when I read her stories, I feel as though that's Midwestern. I do wonder sometimes though if this book were read by somebody in a small town in California or somebody in a small town, if it's more of a small town sort of thing than a Midwestern thing, but there isn't anything particularly dramatic in the landscape. So there isn't, and there is, maybe occasionally I have some tornadoes kind of pass through, or, snowstorms or that kind of thing. But there isn't really anything dramatic in the landscape and in the external forces like there would be if you lived in Tucson, say, like I know some of you do. or if you lived in California, or if you lived in a place that was hit by hurricanes. So to my mind, the Midwestern quality of these stories allows for a deeper introspection between characters, or inspection between characters. That because I don't have to grapple with like a rugged landscape necessarily, then they can grapple with their own rugged or not so rugged personalities or situations. I also think I can remember being at a conference once in Maine and talking to an editor there who was from New York, and following her in my big Midwestern way and smiling and trying to talk. And she's just like, okay, give me some space, get a little, go back, Midwestern girl, back up. And I think that maybe there's some of that in Midwestern stories too, this sort of courtesy, this sort of, is that right? Courtesy, this sort of ebullience of character. Characters are often friendly and engaged in one another's lives, and in ways maybe that if they are in other places, I don't know, because I don't live other places, but I do think it's part of the Midwestern story. And the Midwestern voice, it's the best voice, right? Whatever it is. I don't know if I could define it except that it's the best.
Yeah. Because I know you talked sometime in an interview about the beauty of the Midwest, driving out to Western Illinois, and the lack of wide ranges of terrain, and the beauty of that, and that maybe that gets into the voice.
Yeah. There's a certain gentleness, and it's not necessarily gentle good all the time, right? But there's a certain gentleness, I think, to the Midwest. Now, if I haven't really written a lot of Chicago stories, and I know they would be a little different. They would sound a little different than my small town and somewhat suburban stories as well.
But maybe writing in the city and writing about something that isn't the city, maybe that's maybe there's something about that kind of distance that works.
Yeah, and I probably wouldn't be the first writer to say that, right?
Yeah.
So, Dubliners, he wasn't in Dublin when he wrote Dubliners, James Joyce, and Sherwood Anderson, right? Wasn't he in Chicago when he was writing about Ohio? So I think that, we see where we're from, or we see other places best from a distance, I think.
Well, I'm just going to read this to you. It's not a question, so you don't have to answer it, but it just came in. I know you are out of time, but I am newly Canadian, and wow, has it changed the voice in my writing? So,
okay.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
The way you are is can have an effect on things. Well, Patty, thank you so much. This has been just delightful. Just delightful, and delightful, but also informative, which is the best kind of writer conversations to have. Delightful and enlightening, and pleasurable. This is one of the pleasurable things about writing too, is these kinds of things. And so, thank you so much, and it's just been great, and thank you for asking me. This has just been wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you so much, Eric. So smart.
Yes, thank you both so much. That was such a wonderful, pleasurable conversation, and such a wonderful way to start off the new year. So thank you both for spending your birthday with us, Patty. Happy birthday! Happy book birthday! Thank you for everyone who has already ordered the books. I see your orders coming in. If you are interested, we also have some coffee mugs. If you want a coffee mug, just let us know. You can send us an email at WCFbooks. I'll put that in the chat. And just say, can I get a coffee mug too while supplies last? We'll try and fulfill those orders. It might cost you a little bit more if we're shipping it to you, but we'll let you know. So thank you so much. This event has been recorded, so if you know people who missed the event, don't worry, they can still watch it here on Crowdcast or on our YouTube channel, which I'll send all of you as well. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Patty. This was wonderful. Have a good night.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Have a good year.
Birthday, Patty.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you so much.